Eugene woke up slowly that morning, his heavy eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light filtering through the curtains of the nursing home room. The sharp smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of shuffling footsteps in the hallways brought a familiar yet desolate feeling. He turned over in bed with difficulty, feeling the weight of his age and the abandonment that came with it. Every joint protested, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the deep emptiness that gnawed at his chest. Here I am, alone, without my daughter, without my family, he thought, letting out a tired sigh. The room, impersonal and sterile, seemed to reflect his own condition. The pale, lifeless walls pressed in on him, as if they were trying to erase any trace of who he once was. I never imagined my days would end like this, stuck in this place, far from everything I love, he muttered to himself, tasting the bitterness of his reality. He tried to remember how his life had changed so drastically. It felt like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. I devoted every second of my life to Ingrid, Eugene reflected aloud, his trembling voice breaking the silence. I gave everything, love, care, sacrifice, and now what's left? Tears began to well up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He had cried too much in recent days, and the sadness brought no relief, it only deepened his sense of powerlessness. It seems that, in the end, you are left with nothing but emptiness. Abandoned. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to push back memories of happier times, but they insisted on surfacing, invading his mind with painful clarity. He remembered when Ingrid was just a little girl, running around the house, always full of life and joy. He had done everything to give her the best, to make sure she never faced the hardships he and his late wife had endured. How did everything change so much? Eugene asked himself, his voice now barely a whisper. He knew life wasn't always fair, but he never imagined it would end like this, isolated and far from the people he loved most. Since his youth, Eugene had always been known for his determination and unwavering strength. He grew up in a humble neighborhood where difficulties were constant, but that never made him give up on his dreams. I always knew life wouldn't be easy, but I never thought about quitting, he used to say to anyone who asked where his perseverance came from. From when he met his wife, Sarah, they had little more than the love that united them and an unshakable hope that they could build a better life. Despite the odds, they shared the same vision. They wanted to give their future daughter more than they ever had. The first years of marriage were tough. Eugene worked from dawn till dusk, often juggling more than one job, while Sarah tended a small garden in the backyard, trying to save every penny. One day, our daughter will grow up with everything she needs, without the limitations we had, Eugene would promise Sarah on the nights he came home exhausted from work, yet still with a smile on his face, convinced that their sacrifices would pay off. Sarah, always kind and optimistic, would respond, as long as we're together, we can overcome anything. When Ingrid was born, Eugene's world changed completely. He had already fought hard until then, but now he felt he had to push himself even further. This little girl will have the best, he whispered to himself while cradling his daughter in his arms, looking around the small room that, despite its simplicity, was filled with love. He knew that every sleepless night, every extra job, was for her. Ingrid's arrival brought not only the joy of becoming a father, but also a renewed sense of purpose in life. Sarah, too, dedicated herself tirelessly, juggling housework and supporting Eugene in his plans for their family's future. But their happiness was cruelly interrupted when Sarah fell ill. The disease was swift and relentless. I won't leave you, Eugene promised her, holding her fragile hand in the hospital. But deep down, they both knew time was short. Even in her final moments, Sarah insisted, take care of our daughter, Eugene. Give her everything we dreamed of. And with that last request, she was gone, leaving Eugene in a world that suddenly felt empty and cold. The grief was overwhelming, but he didn't have the luxury of giving in to sadness for long. Ingrid, still so young, needed him more than ever. He took on the role of both mother and father, trying to fill the void left by Sarah's absence. I'll be everything for her, he promised, once again determined not to fail his daughter. Eugene threw himself into his work and caring for Ingrid, ensuring that she never felt the lack of what life had denied Sarah. he prepared meals, kept the house in order, helped with homework, and, whenever possible, told stories about her mother, keeping Sarah's memory alive in the little details of their daily life. Eugene's sacrifices for Ingrid began early. From the moment he realized his daughter had a special spark, he saw in her eyes an endless curiosity and a thirst for knowledge that inspired him to keep going. She has a bright future, he'd tell himself every morning while making breakfast before heading to work. Eugene didn't hesitate to take on extra hours, temporary jobs, and even sell some of his most cherished possessions to ensure Ingrid had everything she needed for her education. When Ingrid started school, Eugene made sure she had all the supplies, even if it meant sacrificing his own needs. "You're going places, sweetheart," he'd repeat every night as they reviewed her lessons together. He helped her with homework, even in subjects he didn't fully understand. He spent hours at the local library, reading up on math, history, whatever was necessary, so he could be the support Ingrid deserved. "Education will take you where the world can't deny you," he'd say with a conviction that made it clear this was his life's mission. As the years passed and Ingrid grew, her performance in school only confirmed what Eugene had always believed: she had a promising future. When it came time for college, money was still tight, but Eugene never let Ingrid feel the weight of the responsibility he carried. He sought out every possible scholarship, saved every penny, and even took on weekend jobs to cover the costs that the scholarships didn't. "I'll do whatever it takes," he told a friend who questioned the exhausting pace of work he was keeping. "She deserves the best, and I'll make sure she gets it." When Ingrid graduated, it was a moment of indescribable emotion for Eugene. He remembered every little struggle, every sleepless night to make sure nothing was missing. The day of her graduation was full of tears and pride. "You did it, sweetheart. Everything we fought for is here in your hands now," he said, his eyes brimming with tears as he held the diploma with her. Ingrid, fully aware of all the sacrifices her father had made, hugged him tightly, grateful for everything. "Dad, none of this would have been possible without you," she said, her voice filled with emotion, feeling the weight of their shared journey. Over the years, Ingrid continued to carve out her path, earning respect and recognition in her field. Each of her achievements was like a medal for Eugene. "My daughter, she's gotten to where I always dreamed," he'd proudly tell the neighbors, showing off pictures of the awards and events she was invited to. For him, every recognition Ingrid received was a living testament that his sacrifices had been worth it. When Ingrid introduced Vincent for the first time, Eugene immediately felt relieved. As a father, he had spent so many years worrying if his daughter would find someone who valued her as much as he did. Vincent was polite, well-spoken, and seemed genuinely interested in Ingrid. "That young man has a good head on his shoulders," Eugene commented with a smile after their first family dinner. "He seems grounded, and above all, he loves you, sweetheart." Ingrid, her eyes glowing with happiness, laughed and replied, "I know, Dad. He makes me feel special." In the first few months, Eugene felt an unprecedented sense of peace. Every time Vincent visited, he was respectful, always kind, and always smiling. He made a point to listen to Eugene's stories, even the ones he'd heard several times about the tough times they had been through. He's a good listener, Eugene thought. Maybe he's just what Ingrid needs, someone who supports her without taking over. As Ingrid's relationship blossomed, Eugene began to believe his daughter had finally found someone with whom she could share her life and dreams. However, over time, small details began to unsettle Eugene. One afternoon, during a family lunch, he noticed how Vincent spoke about Ingrid's business with a strange familiarity. "We're thinking of expanding to other cities," Vincent said, referring to a project Ingrid had started. Eugene found the way his son-in-law spoke odd, as if he were fully involved in the decisions. "Since when are you part of that, Vincent?" Eugene joked, trying to keep the tone light. Vincent just laughed, but his response came with a tone Eugene couldn't ignore. "Ingrid and I are a team now, right, Dad?" That phrase stuck with Eugene. At first, he dismissed it as just an expression of partnership, something natural between couples. But as time passed, Vincent's behavior raised more suspicions. He began making important decisions on Ingrid's behalf without even consulting his wife. He controlled the couple's finances, organized social events, and even insisted on choosing where they would travel or who they could invite to dinners. On one such occasion, Eugene watched Vincent brag about the profits from a project that Ingrid had led on her own. "We're making great strides," Vincent said to friends, while Ingrid sat in silence, looking uncomfortable. One day, Eugene pulled Ingrid aside for a conversation. "Sweetheart, are you happy?" "Vincent seems to be controlling more than he should," he said, worried about his son-in-law's behavior. Ingrid, visibly uneasy, tried to reassure her father. "Dad, Vincent's just trying to help. He says he understands business better, and it makes things easier for me. I trust him." Although Eugene respected his daughter's choice, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this so-called help than met the eye. As time went on, Vincent became even more involved in Ingrid's affairs, including the finances that Eugene had worked so hard to build. Watching closely, Eugene started to see Vincent's true character. There was a coldness in his actions, an obsession with control that was becoming increasingly clear. "Vincent doesn't just want to be my daughter's husband," Eugene thought uneasily. "He wants everything she's achieved." One quiet afternoon, while Eugene was organizing some old boxes in the attic of his old house, he lost his balance coming down the stairs and fell hard. The impact was strong, and although the pain didn't seem serious, he lay immobilized on the floor for a few minutes, feeling his breath heavy and his body aching. "Damn, I'm not as young as I used to be," he muttered, trying to laugh off the situation to ease the discomfort. After a few minutes, he managed to get up with difficulty and went to the phone to call Ingrid, still feeling a slight pain in his arm. "Dad, what happened?" Ingrid's voice sounded alarmed on the other end of the line. "You have to be more careful. I've told you to leave those boxes for another time." Eugene tried to calm her down, minimizing the incident. "It was nothing serious. Just a silly stumble. I'm fine, sweetheart." But Ingrid wasn't convinced. "Dad, this is serious. I don't like the idea of you living there alone. What if something worse happens and no one's around to help?" In the days that followed, Ingrid's concern only grew. She and Vincent began suggesting more frequently that Eugene move into their home. "Dad, we have plenty of space. The house is huge, and you'd be comfortable." "I'd feel much more at ease knowing you're close to us," Ingrid insisted, while making coffee during a visit. Eugene looked around the small kitchen where he had spent so many years, and a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He loved his house, the place where so many memories had been created. "It's just, I don't know if I'm ready to leave this place, sweetheart. This house has been my home for so long," he said. Ingrid smiled, but there was a certain determination in her eyes. "I understand, Dad, but think about it. Moving in with us doesn't mean you're leaving your memories behind. On the contrary, we'll make new ones together. You'll have your own space in the house. Vincent and I want to take care of you." The way she spoke made him realize just how worried she was, and deep down, Eugene knew he was no longer as young or agile as before. The decision wasn't easy, but he trusted his daughter. "All right, my dear," he replied with a light sigh. "I'll come. Maybe being closer will be good for us." The following week, Eugene moved into Ingrid and Vincent's house. The room they had set up for him was on the ground floor, spacious, with a large window overlooking the garden. "Dad, what do you think?" Ingrid asked, eager for his approval. Eugene smiled as he looked out at the garden in bloom. "It's a good place to be," he said with a satisfied air. "Peaceful, and the view reminds me of your mother's garden." His words made Ingrid smile nostalgically. "I'm glad you like it." In the first few days, Eugene felt a sense of relief, being surrounded by his daughter, feeling cared for and safe. Breakfasts were always shared at the table, with light conversations and a sense of family closeness that comforted him. "That's the best part of being here," he'd say, laughing. "At least I don't have to cook just for myself anymore." He was content, surrounded by Ingrid's affection, and believed this new chapter would bring them even closer. However, Vincent observed Eugene with a mix of frustration and disdain. Each day spent under the same roof with his father-in-law felt like an affront to the carefully constructed plans he had for himself. That old man is dead weight, he thought, forcing a fake smile during family meals. To everyone else, Vincent still appeared to be the perfect son-in-law, attentive and helpful, but behind his superficial kindness, he saw Eugene as an obstacle to the complete control he craved over Ingrid's life and, more importantly, over the family's assets. Eugene's presence interfered with everything. He was respected, and his opinion carried weight in the decisions Ingrid made. Every time Vincent suggested a new investment or a way to manage the business, Ingrid would always consult her father. "Shouldn't we talk to my dad before deciding?" Ingrid would say naturally, and it made Vincent's blood boil. He felt constantly monitored, as if Eugene were a shadow, always there, limiting his ambitions. "It's only a matter of time," he muttered to himself while pretending to listen to a conversation between the two. It was during one of those evenings, after a long work meeting with investors, that Vincent decided he had had enough. He looked at Ingrid, exhausted, who casually mentioned that she'd have to take a business trip the following week. "I'll be gone for 3 days. It's an important conference," she said, tidying up some papers in the living room. Vincent nodded, smiling at her reassuringly, but inside, his mind was racing. 3 days, more than enough time. That very night, after Ingrid went to bed, Vincent began to set his plan in motion. He sat in front of the computer, browsing the internet with a clear purpose. He needed to find a place where he could send Eugene without raising suspicion, nursing homes. He typed into the search bar, clicking through various links until he found what he was looking for. He carefully analyzed each option, looking for something far away, isolated, and poorly regulated. After hours of research, he found a facility with a terrible reputation, located in a rural area far enough that no one would stumble upon it by accident. Vincent studied the details of the place. "This will work," he muttered as his eyes scanned the negative reviews and complaints about the awful care the residents received. He smiled. "Perfect. The old man will disappear, and no one will suspect a thing." The first part of the plan was in place. He knew Ingrid would never allow Eugene to be sent to a place like that, so he needed to act carefully, leaving no traces. In the following days, Vincent began laying the groundwork. He called the nursing home, spoke with the director, and after ensuring no questions would be asked, he offered a generous payment. "I don't care what methods you use to run the place, just make sure he doesn't have contact with anyone," he said over the phone, his voice full of determination. The director, realizing he was dealing with someone willing to pay well for discretion, simply agreed. Now, all Vincent had to do was wait for Ingrid to leave. With the details sorted and the nursing home ready to receive Eugene, Vincent knew the perfect opportunity was only a few days away. Vincent, always meticulous in his plans, knew that the real challenge wasn't just getting rid of Eugene, but doing so without raising any suspicion from Ingrid. He spent days thinking about how to execute the plan flawlessly. In the weeks leading up to Ingrid's trip, he subtly probed his father-in-law, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. Eugene, despite his wisdom, had little familiarity with the digital world, making him vulnerable to any technological schemes. Perfect, Vincent thought, feeling a surge of power. One afternoon, while Eugene was relaxing in the living room with a cup of coffee, Vincent took the opportunity to approach him with an envelope of documents. "Dad, I'm handling some paperwork regarding the house. We need to settle a few things about the maintenance and expenses," he said casually, keeping his tone calm and controlled. "You know how complicated these things are these days. Lots of bureaucracy. Better to get it all sorted now, right?" Eugene, who trusted Vincent and had no reason to suspect anything, took the papers without question. He skimmed through them quickly, and everything seemed completely normal at first glance. Sure, Vincent. If it's for the good of the house, I'm with you," Eugene said as he grabbed a pen and started signing each page. "These paperwork things have always been a mystery to me," he commented with a light smile. Vincent, hiding the satisfaction growing inside him, replied with false kindness, "Don't worry, Dad. I've got everything under control. That's what we're here for, to help." As Eugene signed the last document, Vincent watched closely, feeling a triumphant surge within him. Each of Eugene's signatures was another step toward completing his plan to get rid of his father-in-law without leaving any trace. These papers are essential to ensuring the house's finances are always in order. No future worries, Vincent added, creating a false sense of security. The next morning, the sky was overcast, reflecting the unease Eugene couldn't quite explain. He was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper when Vincent entered with a wide grin. "Dad, how about we go out for a bit today? Just the two of us, like old times." "I've got a special plan," Vincent said with forced enthusiasm, trying to sound relaxed. Eugene, surprised by the offer, slowly stood up, still feeling the strangeness of it all. "Well, I don't have anything planned today, so I guess a drive could do me some good," he replied, trying to be polite, though part of him sensed something wasn't right. Vincent grabbed the car keys, and within minutes, they were on the road. During the drive, Vincent kept up casual conversation, asking about Eugene's memories of his youth, keeping him distracted from any suspicions. "You know, Dad, I've always admired how you overcame all the hardships. Not everyone could raise a daughter alone and be so successful," Vincent said, throwing out calculated compliments. Eugene, still cautious, smiled lightly. "It was tough, but it was always worth it. Ingrid is my greatest pride," he responded, his mind drifting to memories of his life with his daughter. As the car drove further away from the city and the scenery changed to a more desolate, unfamiliar area, Eugene began to feel that something was off. "Where are we going, Vincent? I don't recognize this road," he asked, turning to his son-in-law with a worried expression. Vincent maintained his smile, though his eyes no longer carried the same warmth. "Oh, don't worry, Dad. We're almost there. I found a perfect place for you to relax." When they arrived at the rusted iron gate of an old, run-down building, Eugene felt a tightness in his chest. The place had a grim air, and the oppressive silence around them only intensified the foreboding feeling. "What is this?" "This looks like a nursing home," he murmured, his voice trembling with worry. Vincent, not losing his composure for a second, responded coldly, "It's just for a few days, Eugene. It'll be good for you to rest and recharge. You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." Eugene frowned, now clearly suspicious. "Rest? I don't need rest. I'm fine. I don't want to stay here. Take me back," he said, starting to feel the weight of the situation unfolding before him. But Vincent had already anticipated this reaction. "Dad," he said, his voice cold and calculated, "this isn't a choice. I've made the arrangements. It's better if you just accept it. Ingrid doesn't need to know." The firmness in Vincent's words made Eugene realize how serious the situation was. Eugene tried to plead one last time, his voice now filled with desperation. "Vincent, don't do this. I trusted you. My daughter trusts you. You can't leave me here." But it was too late. Vincent, no longer hiding his disdain, stepped out of the car and opened the passenger door. "Get out, Eugene. They'll take care of you, and honestly, you'd better get used to it." Bribing the staff of the nursing home, Vincent ensured that Eugene would be completely isolated. "Here's what we agreed on," he said as he handed an envelope full of cash to the director. "I don't want him to have contact with anyone. No visits, no calls, nothing." The director nodded, taking the money without question. Eugene, on the other hand, felt the crushing weight of abandonment as he was led inside the facility. The once strong, determined man now found himself trapped in a dark place with no way to escape. Back at home, Vincent settled into his office chair with a satisfied air. The first part of his plan was complete. Eugene was now stuck in the nursing home with no means of contacting the outside world. Now Vincent needed to ensure that Ingrid never suspected her father's sudden disappearance. It was time to use technology to his advantage. Vincent knew the lie had to be convincing. He spent the next few hours creating photos of Eugene in various tourist destinations using advanced editing software. He placed Eugene in mountain landscapes, tropical beaches, and charming small towns. Every detail was meticulously crafted, the lighting, the angles, even the relaxed expression on Eugene's face. The images looked so real that anyone would believe. Perfect, Vincent murmured as he adjusted the final photo. He then posted the images on Eugene's social media profiles with captions like, "Finally taking some time for myself and exploring incredible places. I'll come back refreshed." Each post reinforced the idea that Eugene was on a personal journey, enjoying life, keeping anyone who might try to contact him at ease. When Ingrid returned from her business trip, the sun was setting, and the house felt quieter than usual. As soon as she walked in, she noticed her father's absence. "Vincent, isn't Dad home?" "Did he go out?" she asked, setting her bags down, trying to hide the worry creeping in. Vincent, who had been expecting the question, entered the living room with a rehearsed smile. "Oh yes, your dad decided to take a last-minute trip," he replied calmly. "He said he needed to clear his head, take some time for himself. Seems like he's enjoying it." Ingrid frowned. "A trip out of the blue? That doesn't sound like him," she remarked, a bit suspicious. Eugene always let her know about any change of plans, and something so sudden seemed out of character. But before her doubt could grow, Vincent pulled out his phone from his pocket and showed her the forged messages. "Look, he sent me these while you were away," Vincent said, handing over the phone. "It's all here. He even sent pictures of where he's staying." Ingrid took the phone, carefully reading the messages. "Hey, I decided to take a spontaneous trip. I need to clear my mind, get some rest. I'm fine, and I'll be back soon," the first message read. Right after that, there were a series of photos of Eugene at beaches, mountains, and other scenic spots. The images showed her father smiling in serene settings. For a moment, Ingrid felt relieved seeing the pictures. "Well, he really does seem to be doing well," she said hesitantly, looking over at Vincent. "But I don't know, it's still strange. He didn't tell me directly." Sensing he needed to dispel any remaining doubt, Vincent stepped closer, his tone soft, almost paternal. "I thought it was strange at first too, but he told me he didn't want to bother you while you were on your business trip. He said he had it all planned and just needed some time alone." He paused, watching Ingrid's reaction closely. "I know it's not like him, but maybe your dad's just trying to do something new to take care of himself." Ingrid considered his words, glancing back at the phone. The photos seemed so real, the messages so consistent with what her dad would say, that her suspicion slowly faded. "Yeah, maybe he really did decide to do this on his own," she responded, sighing lightly. "I guess everyone needs some time off now and then." She handed the phone back to Vincent, who, with a hidden smile, knew he had just scored another victory in his plan. In the days that followed, Ingrid tried to contact her father directly, sending messages to his number. "Dad, I hope you're having fun. Just let me know when you're coming back. I miss you," she wrote, anxiously awaiting a response. However, the replies she received were short and evasive. "I'm fine, sweetie, enjoying my time. We'll talk soon." With each message, Ingrid felt a slight unease, but the photos Vincent kept showing her always reinforced the idea that Eugene was fine and traveling. As the days went by, Ingrid tried to convince herself that her father was simply going through something different. "Maybe he really does need this time," she said to herself out loud, walking through the empty hallways of the house. Yet deep down, something still bothered her, a strange feeling she couldn't quite shake. The days at the nursing home dragged on slowly, and for Eugene, each morning was a silent battle. The place, which he soon realized was a warehouse for forgotten people, was bleak and depressing. The walls were marked with damp stains, the strong smell of disinfectant barely masking the odor of neglect, and the staff, though present, were clearly indifferent to the suffering of the residents. Eugene spent most of his time in his cramped room, staring out the window, where the empty horizon seemed to reflect the loneliness that consumed him. My daughter must be looking for me. She wouldn't abandon me like this, he murmured to himself, trying to keep hope alive. But with each passing day, the silence around him grew louder, and the lack of contact made him question what was really happening. He wasn't allowed to use the phone, and the few times he asked the staff about any contact from Ingrid, their answers were always vague or harsh. "We don't have any information on that, Mr. Eugene." "Now, rest. It's the best thing you can do," the attendants would say, avoiding eye contact and leaving him with the feeling of being just another number in a cruel system. On the loneliest nights, Eugene remembered the times when Ingrid was still a child. He clearly recalled the nights he'd tuck her into bed, saying, "You will always be my priority, sweetie. I'll never be far from you." These memories were what kept him strong, even as his body grew weaker. His love for Ingrid hadn't changed, and he couldn't believe she was involved in what was happening. She must be being deceived. That's the only explanation, he thought, trying to make sense of the nightmare he was living. The nursing home was a place where time seemed to warp. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours, but Eugene felt as though the days stretched into weeks. Medical care, when it came, was rushed and careless. Meals were tasteless, served on dirty plastic plates, and the residents were treated with a coldness that hurt more than the loneliness. What did I do to deserve this? He wondered, pushing around the food he could barely swallow. His thoughts always returned to Ingrid, and hope, though fragile, was his only comfort. She'll figure out the truth. She'll come for me. But as the days turned into weeks, Eugene felt his emotional strength wearing thin. The wait for Ingrid consumed him, but there was no sign that anyone even knew where he was. The only thing that kept him going was the slim chance that at any moment, his daughter would walk through the door and take him away from that hell. Yet with each new morning that passed without her, the weight of loneliness grew heavier, and doubt began to erode his hope. Vincent grew more confident, believing his plan was unfolding exactly as he had predicted. At dinners with friends and business meetings, his self-assurance grew each day. "I'm finally in control," he thought, proud of his ability to manipulate the situation. In these settings, Vincent became even bolder, joking about how he had solved the problem of his father-in-law. One afternoon, during a casual meeting with one of his closest friends in the dining room of his house, Vincent couldn't resist bragging. "You won't believe how easy it was," he said with a smug smile, leaning forward. His friend, intrigued, looked at Vincent, asking for more details. "I simply got rid of the old man. Eugene was starting to get in the way, so I sent him to a nursing home. The best part? Ingrid has no idea. She thinks her dad's happily traveling." The friend laughed nervously, impressed and shocked at the same time. "You really did that? And she doesn't suspect a thing?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. Vincent shrugged, pleased with himself. "Of course not. I've got it all under control. Fake messages, photos, she hasn't even thought about looking into it. As far as she's concerned, her dad is just taking some time off. It's amazing what technology can do when you use it the right way." What Vincent didn't know was that Ingrid, who had come home early from work, was upstairs in the home office. As she came down to the dining room, she paused before entering. The low voices of Vincent and his friend made her hesitate for a moment, and in that instant, she heard everything. The shock froze her in place for a few seconds. Her hand started to tremble, and a wave of anger rose in her chest, so strong that she could hardly breathe. "My father in a nursing home? How could he?" she thought in disbelief, as her world seemed to collapse around her. Furious, Ingrid knew she had to act to expose Vincent. She took a deep breath and decided not to confront him just yet. Instead, she began crafting a plan in her mind, a plan that would bring Vincent's actions to light in a way he would never forget. Ingrid spent a sleepless night after Vincent's revelation. The fury still burned in her chest, but she knew she had to be strategic. She couldn't simply expose him to his face alone. The impact would be far greater if everyone who admired and trusted him saw his true colors. That's when the idea hit her, a grand party. It would be the perfect setting to reveal everything he had done in public. Vincent wouldn't be able to keep up his facade for long. In the days that followed, Ingrid began planning the event. She sent invitations to close friends and family, many of whom had known and respected Eugene. The official reason for the gathering was a celebration of the family's life and achievements, something Vincent wouldn't question. Confident his plan was still intact, he accepted the idea without hesitation. "A party is just what we need to ease the tension," Vincent said, completely unaware that the true purpose of the event was to bring about his downfall. The night of the party arrived, and the house was filled with guests. The atmosphere was one of celebration, with laughter and conversations echoing through the halls, but Ingrid had much bigger plans in mind. She waited for the right moment, ensuring everyone was comfortably settled and Vincent at the center of attention, surrounded by friends and colleagues. He spoke with confidence, laughing heartily, and basking in the admiration of those around him. Ingrid watched from a distance, taking in every detail, waiting for the exact moment when the party was at its liveliest. Ingrid made her way to the center of the room, where everyone could see her. The conversations around her gradually quieted until a heavy silence settled over the gathering. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Ingrid began, her voice steady but laced with an emotion that commanded attention. "There's something very important I need to share with you, something that has been tormenting me for some time." Vincent, who had been laughing with a group of friends, turned toward Ingrid, intrigued but still unsuspecting of what was about to unfold. Ingrid took a deep breath and continued. "For the past few months, I've been deceived, manipulated by someone I trusted." She paused, locking eyes with Vincent. His smile began to falter. "My father, Eugene, isn't traveling. He was secretly placed in a horrible nursing home without my knowledge, without my permission. And the person who did this is the man I thought was my partner," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The room was stunned. A wave of shock rippled through the guests as all eyes turned to Vincent, who now stood pale and visibly nervous. He tried to muster a smile, raising his hands in defense. "This is absurd, Ingrid. What are you talking about? This is crazy." "You're confused," he stammered, his voice shaking as he tried to maintain control. But Ingrid was prepared. "I'm not confused, Vincent," she said firmly. "I heard you bragging about how you deceived everyone, how you faked messages and photos to make me believe my father was fine. You paid off the nursing home staff to keep him isolated and cut off from contact. I have proof." The guests, still processing the revelation, began to murmur amongst themselves, their disbelief evident. Vincent, now desperate, tried to defend himself. "This is a setup. She's twisting things. I did it for her, to protect the family." His words grew weaker as Ingrid stared at him with nothing but contempt. Suddenly, the doors to the dining room slowly creaked open, and the muffled sound of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Everyone at the party froze. The murmurs died down, and the room plunged into an eerie silence. Standing in the doorway was a familiar figure, and the sight drained the color from Vincent's face. It was Eugene, dressed simply but with a posture that still carried the strength that remained within him, despite all he had endured. The guests were in shock. They knew Eugene as the man who was supposedly traveling the world, just as Vincent had led them to believe. But there he was, not on some sun-drenched beach or exotic city, but back in his daughter's home. His gaze was firm and determined to tell the truth. Eugene took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room until they found Ingrid. She gave a small nod, a silent confirmation that she had found him and rescued him from that awful place. He took a few steps into the room, and all eyes turned to Vincent, whose nervousness was now impossible to hide. Eugene stopped in the middle of the room, locking eyes with his son-in-law, and the tension in the air was so thick it was as if the room had lost all its air. "For months, I was trapped in a place no one should ever be sent," Eugene began, his voice heavy with both sadness and anger. "I was put in a nursing home, locked away, cut off from the world, without my daughter knowing where I was, all because Vincent wanted to get rid of me." The shock on the faces of the guests was palpable, with some covering their mouths in disbelief at what they were hearing. "You used me, Vincent," Eugene continued, slowly approaching his son-in-law, who now looked cornered like a trapped animal. You forged documents, lied to my daughter, and created a web of deceit to make sure no one would find me. And why? Because I was in your way? Because you wanted complete control? Vincent, now completely at a loss, tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Eugene, you don't understand. I was trying to protect Ingrid, to take care of things, he stammered, desperate, grasping for any excuse that might justify his actions. But Eugene wasn't interested in excuses. You weren't taking care of anything. You were manipulating, controlling, destroying what was left of our family, Eugene said, his voice sharp. I trusted you. You were part of our family, and yet you threw me into a place where no one would visit, where I was treated like a burden. The silence in the room was suffocating. The guests, who had once looked at Vincent with respect and admiration, now stared at him with disgust and disbelief. The truth Eugene had brought to light was undeniable, and Vincent was trapped. The heavy silence that had overtaken the room was broken only by the tense whispers of the guests, all still reeling from the shocking revelations Eugene had shared. The confident smile Vincent had worn at the start of the party had completely vanished. He was pale, his hands sweaty and trembling. Suddenly, he could feel the eyes of disgust and disbelief from the friends and family who had once admired him. Now, he knew the truth had come crashing down on him, and there was no escape. Realizing that things were about to get much worse, Vincent's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out of the situation. Panic began to rise in his chest as he looked for a way to flee. He swallowed hard, and as Eugene continued to reveal the extent of his lies and manipulations, Vincent took a step back, inching toward the exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed before the consequences caught up to him. But his attempt didn't go unnoticed. With the keen awareness of someone who had faced many battles in life, Eugene caught Vincent's furtive movement. Where do you think you're going, Vincent? Eugene's voice cut through the air, firm and commanding, drawing everyone's attention back to the cornered son-in-law. Vincent froze, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to come up with an excuse. I just need a minute to think, he stammered, clearly shaken. But the look on Eugene's face made it clear that this excuse wouldn't fly. Before Vincent could move any further, two of the family's longtime friends, John and Paul, both men with strong, imposing presences, stepped forward to stand beside Eugene. You're not going anywhere, Vincent, John said, his voice filled with indignation. After everything we've heard tonight, you're going to face the consequences. Vincent glanced around desperately, but all he saw were eyes filled with contempt. No one there was willing to help him. I can explain, I swear, Vincent pleaded, his voice now reduced to a pitiful tone. He held up his hands as if trying to calm the situation, but no one was listening. Explain? Eugene took another step forward, his eyes locked on Vincent. You lied to my daughter, locked me away in a place where I was treated like a burden, and now you want to run? With every word Eugene spoke, the weight of the truth bore down on Vincent. He knew there was no more running, no more hiding. After the revelations, the room buzzed with murmurs of indignation, and every pair of eyes in the crowd was filled with disdain for Vincent. He desperately tried to regain control, but it was too late. Eugene and Ingrid stood side by side, towering over the man who had destroyed their family's trust. The tense silence was finally broken by Eugene, who, with a firm gesture, commanded, "You have no place here anymore. Vincent, leave my house now." Defeated, Vincent looked around, seeing the faces of former friends and allies now twisted with disgust. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Each step he took toward the door felt heavy, and Ingrid's cold gaze followed him, colder than he had ever seen from her. When he reached the door, John and Paul stood aside, ready to escort him out. "You're not welcome here anymore," Paul said, his voice thick with restrained anger. As Vincent crossed the threshold of the house he once considered his kingdom, he realized he had lost everything: the mansion, the power he thought he held, the comfortable life with Ingrid. All of it crumbled before him. At the gate, he turned one last time, hoping to catch Ingrid's eyes, perhaps searching for a hint of pity, but her stare was empty, filled with nothing but contempt. "Never come back," she said firmly, her words as sharp as a blade. Vincent left the property without looking back, the weight of shame pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. He knew there was no more hiding the truth, and soon the consequences would catch up with him. And that's exactly what happened. In the days that followed, an investigation uncovered the full extent of his crimes. Beyond the forged documents, Vincent had been involved in a series of financial frauds, using Eugene's name to gain control of the family assets. Once the authorities discovered the scheme, Vincent was arrested without the possibility of bail. As Vincent faced justice, the truth about Eugene finally emerged. The name that Vincent had tried to tarnish was restored with dignity. Friends and acquaintances who had been deceived by Vincent's lies sought out Eugene to apologize and offer their support. "I never should have believed his lies," said an old family friend. "You've always been an honest man, Eugene." Ingrid, for her part, spent her days by her father's side, rebuilding the trust that Vincent had tried to destroy. She still felt the deep pain of betrayal, but with every conversation with Eugene, every gesture of love and support he offered, the wound slowly began to heal. "We'll get through this together, Dad," Ingrid said one peaceful afternoon as they sat in the garden. Now free of Vincent's presence, though shaken by all he had been through, Eugene was grateful that the truth had finally come to light. "I always knew that what's done in the dark eventually comes to light," he told Ingrid as they gazed at the horizon. His reputation, built over so many years of hard work and sacrifice, had been restored, and now he could live his days with the dignity he deserved. In the months that followed, Ingrid and Eugene worked together to not only rebuild their trust, but also restore the home that had been shattered by Vincent's lies. Each conversation, each shared moment of affection between father and daughter, was like a brick in the reconstruction of something that should never have been destroyed. The house, once silent and filled with shadows, began to come alive again. Laughter echoed through the halls, and the lightness that had vanished returned. With each passing day, the garden, which had always been Eugene's sanctuary, bloomed more beautifully than ever. He spent his mornings there, tending to the flowers with the same care he gave to his family. "The flowers know when there's peace in the air," he often told Ingrid, smiling as he pruned a bush. Ingrid, standing beside him, smiled back, watching as her father's energy seemed to renew with every plant that flourished. The garden became a symbol of renewal and resilience, a place where the painful memories of the past were gently replaced by the growth of something new and beautiful. Ingrid found comfort in the simple routines of daily life. The scent of flowers mixed with the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the conversations with Eugene filled her days with meaning. "Dad, you always told me the truth prevails," Ingrid said one afternoon as they sat together on the wooden bench in the garden. "Now I truly understand what that means." Eugene smiled, his eyes tired but full of wisdom. "The truth always finds its way, my dear, even if it takes time, even if the path is difficult. It blooms just like this garden." He looked around at the flowers, inhaling the sweet scent of lavender, and his expression was one of pure serenity. The house, once a stage for betrayal and lies, became a place of unity once more. Friends and family visited frequently, filling the rooms that were once empty with laughter and stories. The heavy energy that Vincent had left behind dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of victory, not a bitter triumph, but a reclamation of dignity and truth. As time passed, Ingrid and Eugene knew they had overcome the worst together. The pain and lies of the past had become part of a story they no longer avoided but accepted as just one chapter in their lives, not the whole book. They had rediscovered the path to joy. The garden flourished, as did the love between father and daughter, and the house was once again a place where truth, love, and peace reigned.